It is the thick of the off season. This is the time of year where we ask the big questions, the deep questions like better or worse. Coming up on the show today, we're going to be going through the Penn State roster and discussing whether or not we think this team is better or worse at each position. It's a simple question, and it's one that I think is important because where we're starting today is this is one of, if not the top team in the nation heading into 2025. We'll also be talking about 2026. So if I get the wrong date, please forgive me. Recruiting always messes me up, let alone the fact that 2028 is now on the table as well. So all that today, plus your questions, comments, thoughts, concerns here on the show. We always have our regulars here. Ryan was here before the show. He says a live show the day after a good wide receiver commute. Let's go. Yes, we'll be talking about Davion Brown later in the show today. Steven says, good morning. We went looking late last night for T. Frank and Company committed breakdown. After a while, figured it would be a main topic for today's show. That is correct. And we'll go to Sean Fitz to start us off. Fitz was coaching baseball last night. Ryan was coaching baseball last night. I was unaware of what was going on because I'm really good at my job. So Fitz, welcome to the show today.
Hey, my pleasure. The live from the first base coaching box was not happening last night. Just not a good enough service at that field. So maybe next time. But 7 p.m. last night, sure enough, Greg Pickle on the job. Thank goodness for Greg, as we all say all the time. But Penn State picking up the newest commitment in the class of 2026. T. Frank, are we doing the thing right now? Are we gonna stick to intros, or we come back to it, or what do you think?
Yeah, we'll come back to that later. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a whole song and dance that's going to happen when we get into all that stuff.
Fantastic. Can't wait. Happy belated Mother's Day to the mothers listening to this, including my mother, who, dad makes her listen to it, but I think she likes hearing my voice. Nate, we have a lot of people that come up to us and talk to us about the show, and you would think it's all guys. It's not. We get a lot of couples that listen to the show together. We're down in Florida speaking to a Penn State group, and how many husbands and wives came up and said, hey, we listen to the show. We love the show. How many people do we run into at Anti-Fragile? So happy belated Mother's Day to all the mothers, because we get lumped into an all male society on the board, which is not the case. We know a lot of great female posters, women posters on our site and on our YouTube channel, and we appreciate them very much. Happy Mother's Day to you guys.
Yeah, well said. Nate, you got to top that. Good luck. Hi.
Yeah. I love the ladies. The ladies are great. Of
the direction I thought we were going, I didn't think it was going to be that
They find you so adorable, Nate. They just find you so. They always tell you that too.
Yeah, listen. It's we speak the same language, so it's good. But we appreciate everybody that tunes in, and I do think it is a point worth mentioning that there is far more, and you see this at the stadium, right? If you're actually in person at the stadium, it's a good breakdown, right? I mean, there's a lot of women that go to, and obviously we only have male voices on our channel, but I do think it's worth acknowledging and understanding that there are voices and opinions worth representing out there of that persuasion. So, yeah.
So we're going to talk about something we've discussed a couple times so far this offseason. And there's that, I'm trying to build a database in my own head of evidence that Penn State is really a top 4 team in college football heading into the season. And if they're going to go on a run to try and win a college football playoff, like we have seen them try to do from, whether it is getting 3 new wide receivers, being aggressive in the spring portal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what are the earmarkers of have other teams done this and then been successful at that mission? And so at this point in May, I just want to kind of take stock of some of the facts surrounding the team, some of the things that are coming out right now. On 3 is pretty high on Penn State. Ari Wasserman has Penn State as the number 1 team heading into the summer. There was also a conversation, another article, 2026 mock drafts, where everyone we're just done with the draft like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. And now we're already looking ahead at 2026. We all remember Christian Hackenberg being the number 1 overall pick, according to Todd McShay, the year before, and then he goes in the second round after not a great year. So we know this, what's worth a specifics of this guy's number 1, this guy's number 2. That can all change over the course of next year. But when you say, and Penn State has 6 players in the top 100 of next year's NFL draft, according to, the early outputs, I think that's a little more concrete. I think that's a little more of a reasonable bandwidth of the top, 3 rounds of the draft. So, Fitz, I want to come to you with this one. Just the question here after all that setup is, are these things you've seen from other programs, other earmarkers that program then went on to back up all of that? Because these are sort of like fact-based things in terms of seniors, quarterback returning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we've seen it. We saw Michigan win a national title on that 2 years ago, right? I mean, you look at the retention that they had, the effort that they put into the retention that offseason that brought back those 23, 24-year-old offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and they won that way. Penn State, hopes it can do that. They should have a pretty good offensive line, and they've got guys that really complement each other on defense. With bringing back Nittany, bringing back Zane. I just think that's where it starts, is with retention. Penn State had 5 guys drafted this year, which is like the low water mark for them, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. Like 5 guys in a draft is amazing for some schools, but Penn State's done it, I believe, in 5 straight drafts now. So like there's something on the other side of that. And you see 6 guys in the top 100 of next year's mock draft, and that kind of makes sense. So when you talk about things being cyclical in college football, it's going to happen. There's going to be down years. There's going to be up years. There's going to be 11 win seasons, 9 win seasons, whatever. But you can now manipulate that a little bit more because of the ability to bring those guys back that wouldn't have come back 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. I also think, to the point you mentioned about having those 5 or 6 guys in every draft, Ohio State didn't have that many number 1 picks this past offseason, but they had a ton of guys that went in that top 100. I think there was a lot of them pre-draft that were all profiled as like 2nd-round picks, having Donovan Jackson and Emeka Ibuka go in the 1st round, but then buttressing that with a bunch of guys that were going to be NFL starters that are picked in the NFL starter territory in that top 100. I think that's also indicative of another way a team has built a championship. Nate, you were going to say something before I jumped in there.
I need to know who the 6 are. I don't want to set you up for failure here, but do you know who the 6 are? I know Drew. I know Nick. I know Nittany. Who are the other 3?
Give me 1 second. I got to pull up my list. You caught me taking a swig of water because the allergies, which I never had until my 30s, are suddenly like beating me in the face. Yeah. Drew Allard, Nittany, Dennis Sutton, Nick Singleton, Zane Durant. Interestingly, Katron Allen and Amari Campbell. So Katron Allen, I believe. Amari Campbell, I don't know about that one. But I think you could easily substitute a guy like... Let me make my own edit and say, let's put AJ Harris in there.
Yeah.
Instead of...
I was waiting for
Campbell.
that name. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay.
So do you buy it? Do you buy that list minus Amari Campbell?
No, I don't think that... Look, Zane's interesting to me because there are physical things about him that just aren't changing. And so how that fits in an NFL mold is going to be an interesting thing to see. But those guys weren't and I want to be careful here, but I'm going to say they weren't flirting with the 1st round this past year. So like a big part of that 5 number, right, for this year's draft class for Penn State is the fact that another 7 who might have been drafted came back. That's the whole point. Like,
yeah,
I'm probably going to end up writing about it today, but ESPN did a thing last week or the week before, I can't remember, but the top 25 class, like newcomer classes. And so the way that they grouped it was incoming transfers and like stud freshmen.
Yeah.
Guess what team isn't on that list? Right.
I would imagine it's not Indiana.
Penn State.
Oh, right. I forgot. Yeah.
Right.
Penn State show, of course. Yeah.
I didn't even get the joke. Anyway, point being, it is, I think you're seeing 2 contrasting schools of thought that have in some ways been married that Penn State really isn't doing, right? I Trevor Pena has some hype, and sure, right? Like, okay. But if you look at the transfer class that Penn State brought in, if you look at the class of incoming freshmen that Penn State brought in, and you're asking yourself whether or not those qualify as like instant injection of elevation, it's not. And not only is it not, but the reason for that is Penn State is counting on its older guys leading this, right?
Yeah.
Being the front end of the train and really delivering the success that they're looking for. But I do think it's interesting to ask the question right now, can you do this on that alone? like, do you need that young guy? Because Ohio State did last year.
Yeah.
Right? Jeremiah Smith, like they needed some studs out of those younger classes. And it's
Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, when they already had Travion Henderson. You're right. They added quite a bit to that roster in terms of impact guys at the top end of the team.
I wouldn't suggest that Penn State hasn't filled holes, right? Like they have done a good job of helping to round out the roster, but is it a star level that can put Penn State in that conversation? I'm not stunned. I get where the conversation is. It's just interesting to me right now that this team is getting as much hype as it's getting.
Yeah. Well, again, we're comparing different models. Ohio State going one way, Michigan going the retention and development. The class of 2022 was a top 5 class in its cycle. You lose Abdul Carter, obviously, that's a big part of that, but the majority of those top guys are on the roster still and are all seniors now. So that veterancy and then backfilling with guys that will play. Like, I think even a guy like Owen Wafel could find a role on the team as a run stuffer, as a guy who's in the rotation, as maybe an unheralded guy in the transfer portal. Again, to your point, not instant impact freshmen or seniors, but role players. I guess Fitz, by the way, the 6 players in the first top 100 were, according to College Football Network. So take that for what you will. I'm not overly familiar with College Football Network's work, but I think it does. This generally does speak to the that part of the class, because most of this is Katron Allen, Singleton, Durant, Denine, Dennis Sutton, Allard, like that class of 2022. And I think there's guys from 2023 that we're overlooking as well in this particular conversation. Somebody that I don't think is familiar with the talent depth at Penn State and some of the guys that could be on the rise. Do you think there's enough guys internally on the rise, Fitz, to make that happen?
I think so. And I think there's still a lot to go with. We've been getting hit from all sides with Penn State as a preseason number 1. And Nate and I have pushed back a little bit on that, just with, I think it's kind of like this everywhere. You're so close to it that you notice the flaws much more inherently than if you're Ari Wasserman put Penn State number 1, from on 3. Like, he's not looking at the day-to-day stuff and still having the questions that we have about the 4th defensive tackle. He's looking at the 1 to 22, the starters, and hey, they match up pretty well with a lot of teams in the Big Ten. Then you look at what other teams are, Ohio State's losing so much on both lines. And it's just all that sort of gets into just a broad brush. And I think we try to avoid that. So, like, we see the flaws more inherently than most. And I think that's just a victim of being around it, That's kind of how that all comes out. But if you look at Penn State's roster, there's still plenty of holes to patch, which there is every year. Like, that's kind of the thing. Like, and I know the expectations are higher this year, but you always need those younger guys to step up. We've seen some of the guys that are key members of this defense, key members of both sides of the ball right now, needed to step up as younger players and fill a gap that maybe they weren't ready to do so. And I'm curious to see how this works out with a decent sized group of people. You mentioned defensive tackle. You can also talk about linebacker depth. You can also talk about safety big time. I think safety is still a major question. You have several things on that side of the ball where you're just not as comfortable with, and that's okay. Yeah. And that's okay, because you always have to make these changes because it's college football. You're not signing long-term extensions for a guy where they're here, play for 7 years like you're in the pros. You got to deal with Jalen Reed being here for 4 years and then move on. Like, that's kind of how that stuff works. And I think that's pretty cool. But at the same time, you're going to continue to have these holes. And even the number 1 team in the country, even Ohio State last year, what was the conversation heading into the Penn State game?
Yeah.
Well, this offensive line is
so
toast.
banged up, and they don't have the depth, right?
Right.
And suddenly they found the depth.
Correct. And you didn't go out and sign the depth. You had to figure out who was going to step up, which one of those younger players was going to step up. And, fortunately for them, they were able to do that. So this is nothing new to college football, except you can plug those gaps with transfer guys right now. But as we've seen, that's not always like the best case scenario. Like you want to continue to develop and cultivate your roster to be self-sustaining, really. So you don't have to go to the portal to figure out, who your fourth or fifth linebacker is going to be. I think that's very important when you talk about a roster building situation. I think Penn State's done it really well as a developmental program. They've been able to continue to sort of squeeze that out there and get guys that can contribute, even if they're not top line guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. I want to get to something quickly here before we get into the next phase of the show. I'm going to go into the weeds on something, and I've learned my lesson, honestly, of I am not an expert at quarterback mechanics, but Brad Mandler posted this video recently. I believe it was either last night or early this morning of Drew Aller throwing, in the offseason. We've had plenty of conversations either here or on the Blue White Illustrated message board about Drew Aller's footwork, his mechanics. Everyone wants him to step into his throws. And I'm not saying that there is not an issue with his footwork and his mechanics when it's wrong. But the more I've studied this and listened to what Brad has to say, watch these videos, seen the drills, all those things, that's not the point of like stepping into a throw the way you might say from, a quarterback from 15 years ago. He's also working in these situations, as you can see here, on throwing off platform. These are intentional things. So when you're watching Aller, just remember he's not working on what you think he's working on. There is a new way that quarterbacks are throwing the football. And as you can see here, he's working on throwing laterally, off platform, making sure he's got the same mechanic. So these are all intentional. Yes, there are times when he's not accurate, and there are times when his footwork is a part of that. But to me, what I've seen is it's when he's applying these things in times he doesn't need to, where he's trying to apply these more advanced mechanics instead of just being in the rhythm, being in the moment. So I know that we're going to get to the same place, and I know it's going to be just an argument about all these things in the details, and some people don't care about that. But to me, it's the intentionality. It's I'm trying to do something harder and trying to do the advanced thing rather than I'm just bad at throwing the football. Now, it may lead to an inaccurate pass either way. And I'm not here to say that that's not going to happen, but I just want it was a great illustration of something I've tried to point out before of like he does things and he's trying to do things on an NFL level from his footwork and his balance and all those things. So that is T. Frank's tangent for today, talking about Drew Aller mechanics. Now I want to get to something that's much more relatable, which is beer, Nate Bauer. Tell us about Anti-Fragile, sponsor here on the BWI Live Show.
It's great. My kids asked me last night, this is terrible. I probably should. They said, "What's a bar?" And I said, "Anti-Fragile." And then they got it. They understood. They didn't really have that connection there. But of all the places that we go in State College, the one bar that we can take our children to and have a good time, and they're not ruining anybody else's time, is Anti-Fragile, right? The grown-ups bar in downtown State College. Excellent cheesesteaks from John's there out front, as you can see if you're watching on YouTube. In-house, all locally batched, right? Every buzzword that you can think of to describe their local beer that is also excellent and you can drink many of is at Anti-Fragile. So, we have been very, very proud to have them as our sponsor and very appreciative of their support of this show over the last couple of years.
And appreciate these guys being experts on Anti-Fragile and making sure everyone knows exactly. By the way, I love the fact that when we go places, I went to the NIL event in Philly, and you know what was one of the number one topics was Anti-Fragile. This was John's and Anti-Fragile. So it's awesome when you guys support the things that support us That is the best possible outcome. So if you go anytime this summer, you're in town because everyone loves coming back to State College to just hang out. You should definitely come in the summer because not that there's ever like a super long wait at Anti-Fragile, but it's just easy to just wander around downtown. We have city level amenities in the summer without the population density. So it's super nice. So you should come and visit. You should hang out and you should tell them that you heard about it here on the BWI Live Show.
If I can I just add one small nugget? New to Anti-Fragile, friend of the show, Todd, is a new bartender at Anti-Fragile, and I personally cannot wait. And I believe that all patrons of Anti-Fragile will be so excited to have him pouring beers and mixing up cocktails for them. So
Nate's absolutely going to abuse this privilege of having a fan of the show giving him drinks.
You realize it's going to cost me more.
Yeah, you got to get
tips have to be 100%.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I know. Anyway.
For sure. So Nate's going to take a quick break, and we're going to get to Fitz's recruiting update because one of the major things that people want to talk about today, the biggest news from yesterday, Penn State got a commitment, and it's at wide receiver. Penn State football had 3 commitments in the class of 2026 at wide receiver. Jaquaden Guilford decided to back out of his commitment, take a expanded view of his recruiting, allow some of the other schools that have been interested in him after his commitment to have their chance. And now Penn State has found a new receiver for the class of 2026. It's not Jaquaden Guilford though. So Fitz, here now, who is it?
You're leading the witnesses there with that Guilford talk, but Davion Brown, Fat Rat, he goes by. Penn State will have one more year of Fat Man and Katron Allen. They're going to get Davion Brown as part of the class of 2026. So the Fat Virginia connection is there, living on the legacy. But a 4-star prospect by the industry, 220 nationally, number 34 wide receiver, 220 by on 3. I got caught up in that. I'm sorry. I was reading live is not great. But Davion Brown is on board. He committed last night. 3rd receiver in the class for Penn State. Good player. You turn on the tape. He lists himself at 6'3". He's about 6'1", 205 pounds somewhere in there. So a thicker receiver. More in the mold of what Penn State got from Matthew Otten down there in Virginia as well. But you put on the tape. I watched some sophomore stuff, some junior stuff today. Really good football player in the sense of run after the catch, doing a lot of things that are.
He was used more as a gadget player in his sophomore season, right?
Yes, he was, and also used as a fly pattern guy, like a run past him and go get it guy, which I hate. Obviously, if you've listened to this before, those are not very helpful on film, but his quarterback didn't get the ball there. So we got to see quite a bit of contested catches from Davion Brown as a junior. So I like seeing the ball skills there and things like that. So he always had to slow up, turn back around and go make the play. And he did a pretty good job of that. A little bit more diverse on the route selection than a guy like Otten, but really does some great things in the short to intermediate passing game, finding some finding some running lanes. I think he does that really well. I like his running back stuff a lot. Not necessarily that he's a running back in college, but he's able to find green space and then accelerate, get going. He's got
visions, set up blocks.
His visions, his pace, like he sets himself up and then he can accelerate pretty well. He's got a 4.42 on file, I believe, from the Under Armour Future 50 at one point. Have not seen anything really recent and don't have any track times on him, but seems like he can run. But again, he's a thicker receiver. If we're drawing comparisons right now, and T. Frank, you were probably going to set me up for this later, but there's a lot of Kobe Howard here in terms of making things happen across the middle, and then eating up yards after catch. And we didn't get to see much of Howard as a senior because of the injury that cost him a lot of the year at Chaminade Madonna. But that was really the specialty, and what Penn State thought they were lacking in this room is guys that can make plays after the catch. And Brown kind of fits that mold. He's a guy that I think just does a little bit of everything. I'm very curious to see where he tests out after. I think that Future 50 was a year ago. So where he's at with the weight that he's added, with the size that he's added, he's also plays safety. He plays a little bit everywhere on that field. But good football player. And this is one that Penn State had been looking at in that group of Virginia wide receivers that became so famous. Travis Johnson's still on the board as well. Connor Salmon has since committed to Clemson. But Penn State got one of the Virginia three. And for a while, it looked like that may not be the case. Davion Brown had Duke high on his list. He had Georgia high on his list. Georgia got another guy yesterday, so I'm not sure if that pushed him out of their plans or anything like that, but he did have an official visit set up to Georgia, also had an official visit set up to Penn State for the summer. When we talked a little bit last week in the S-Zone about where Penn State was going to go at receiver, it seemed kind of wide open, because you look at Messiah Hampton. You don't feel very good about Messiah Hampton if you're Penn State anymore. You know, there was a time when they thought that maybe he was an early commit. Did not happen. He's probably going to go to Oregon. But you've got those Virginia guys. Travis Johnson still has an official visit set up. Hayden Moore, the Minnesota commit, has an official visit set up for the summer. And then Penn State added another official visitor for this weekend. So you've got opportunities to continue to expand that class. Probably set out looking for 3, but I could see them stretching to 4. I mean, this is a rebuild, right? So that's kind of where Penn State would go with that. But Davion Brown, a little bit more size. Jaquaden Guilford's about 5'10.5", 5'11". LeVar Key's about 5'9". So a little bit more size there. And Penn State will continue to look at receivers moving forward in 2026.
Yeah, you mentioned the size, and you brought who did you bring up there as your comp for him?
I had Kobe Howard.
Kobe Howard.
Yeah.
It's funny because just the size and the physicality that he brings to the table, just generally the way he looks on film, reminds me of Trey Wallace from last year. So, like, from a size perspective and from a general presence on the field, this is a guy who's got presence and has that. But as a senior, or heading into a senior in high school, that's obviously very different than a guy at the end of his career in college. And you mentioned too that the physicality of not being 6'3", he still plays big, and I think those are the important factors when you're looking at a receiver. What's the style of play over just the raw physical tools? And I had this up here a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to go over kind of his ranking. Curious, maybe I wouldn't say the disparity, but he's not in the on 300. 89 overall, so just borderline 4-star. But he's a 3-star for Penn State. 247 has him in the top 50 at 142. ESPN has him at 71 overall in the class of 2026, and then Rivals has him as an unranked 4-star. So there seems to be a little bit of a disparity in terms of top 100, top 150, not ranked. He seems to be a guy that kind of is across the board at the receiver position. Is that indicative of just receiver recruiting, or is there something else you find interesting about that, where certain guys get a consensus and other guys have this kind of across the board just a profile as a player?
Yeah, we're still early in this particular cycle. I know it doesn't feel like it, but if you take a look at the camp circuit, so good for you. You're going to get some fresh clips this weekend when State College Elite 11 comes to town and all 22. So you can get to, maybe we can refresh the Fitz's recruiting update montage there. But then you've got Under Armour Baltimore, you've got Under Armour Jersey. So the Northeast plays catch up basically in these rankings. So I don't know if that's particularly at work here, but you will see probably more movement with Penn State recruits in a month or two, I would say, just in terms of like just visually seeing those guys. Like it's very different when you have to go off of junior tape and all the information that you have, and then you actually see these guys that can make a difference. So going back to your original question with ranking receivers, I still don't know that we've nailed down what the surefire receiver prospect looks like outside of Jeremiah Smith. Not too many Jeremiah Smith floating around here. So I think everybody's looking for something different. Some people look for the tall guys, and we've had this conversation before on the show. The tall guys pan out less than the short guys. And does that necessarily mean that they won't hit tall guys? Yeah, they'll absolutely hit on tall guys. It's such a crapshoot right now. And these guys are the best athlete on the field every time they take the field. Like that is what it comes back to for receivers. How do I say this without sounding like a jerk? It's easy to look good as a receiver when you're the best athlete on the field. Does that mean it will transfer over to the college game? Not necessarily. We've seen that a lot lately, especially around here.
You mentioned looking like Jeremiah Smith. Even a guy, I thought Noah Rogers a couple years ago was like a surefire guy that could not miss. Now, he went to that Ohio State room, and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith and all those players were a part of the conversation. Just generally the players that were in that room, not necessarily Jeremiah Smith was there at the time. But he's now at NC State, I think, and transferred back to his home area. So even guys that look like Jeremiah Smith don't always pan out because there are so many different factors that go into playing receiver. It is truly one of the most diverse positions on the football field, where you can have a guy that's 5'9", be a number one receiver. Think Steve Smith in the NFL, or you can have a guy who's 6'5", also be effective at that position. So there's a lot of ways to win, and so everybody looks, as you mentioned, everybody looks good if they look good on the high school level, but it's a lot harder in college. Any other thoughts here about Davion Brown before we get out of here on this topic?
Not particularly. I think if you go back to receiver, scheme matters so much, and a lot of guys don't give it the opportunity to matter as much. Like, they look at this and see what the biggest logo is and then go for it, and that's not always the best idea. Now, is that possible that it's the best upfront opportunity for you financially? Absolutely. But you don't know that that's going to work. And as it's been said many times, the real money is in the pro money, and that's what you got to look for.
So we'll have more as Penn State heads into official visit weekend. Obviously, this is earlier before then. If you're watching this later, then, Penn State has an official visit weekend, the weekend of the 16th. But make sure you subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, because there's going to be more news this summer. Penn State's not done adding recruits, so subscribe here. And, of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is the place to subscribe if you want to get the information on recruiting, the intel, the full fire hose of Ryan Snyder and Nate and Sean Fitz's information here from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Davion Brown wasn't the only wide receiver that we were talking about this week. I know there's another receiver. You mentioned tall receivers, and that's just where I want to start with Brian Williams, who I believe Fitz, he's taking a visit this weekend, right? This dude, it looks huge on film.
Yeah, he's a big guy. Penn State's been tracking him for a while. They offered him in April. He had a busy April, picked up Penn State, Georgia, and Alabama in about 3 or 4 days. So this is a guy who plays at Lake Mary High School. His quarterback is Noah Grubbs, who's committed to Notre Dame in the class of 2026. They throw the ball quite a bit. He spreads the ball around, and he's a guy that's, you and I were talking before the show, and I said, hey, what do you have Davion Brown listed at? Because he listed himself at 6'3", and you were like, I got him at 6'1", and he does not look 6'3" on tape. Well, this guy's listed at 6'4". I'm not sure that he looks that way from a movement standpoint on tape, but I think he moves pretty well. Went to Under Armour or Orlando. Got some fluidity to his game. Yes, he's probably one of those guys that takes a couple of years to sort of try to pan out, but at the same time, I think there's a lot to like there. Penn State is in the mix. He's got official visits. He's had official visits scheduled for a couple months now with Syracuse and Vanderbilt. Florida seems to be in the mix. Auburn's in the mix. So there's a lot of schools that are very interested in him, and I think that there's that for a guy like Williams, it will depend for some of the bigger schools where some of the other guys that are ahead of him on the board end up as to where he'll take those official visits. So I think he's a good looking player. I think he's got a lot of potential as a tall guy, but he's got some, he plays, I hate to say this, but as a receiver, he plays low, which sounds stupid, but when you're a 6'4" receiver, when you're a 6'4" receiver and you can play at a pad level of a 6'1" receiver, 6-foot receiver, and can make those and actually have the feet to pull it off, you can make that work. So Penn State's been watching for a long time, offered in April, and now he's going to get up for the first time this weekend.
He's a guy, I coined this term this morning, checking out these highlights. He's a heart rate guy, because when I watch him burst off the line at that size, it makes my heart rate go up. There are certain players that just have that snap off the line of scrimmage. You look at them and then you look at their composites tools and you're like, oh, and then that's when you start to get carried away with what could be, what could happen. Because you're right, as a guy who can sink his hips and turn, I still think, there's not a lot of deep digs and slants and things where he has to get intermediate separation on his highlight film, which is always why I like going to the full game film, see what he's asked to do, see what he can do, find evidence of those traits. Because, you can build the picture you want to build on highlights. But as you can see here, at the very least, he has got the stop-go ability of a deep threat that you can snap it off, come back downhill on a slant or on a stop route and get just a free 7 yards off the line of scrimmage. I'm a big fan, as you know. Like, I like a diversity of skill sets in a class. I don't want them all to be one note because something could go wrong there. Having a guy who is 6'1", having a guy maybe who's 6'3", pushing 6'4", and then of course with Jasir Rogers and LeVar Keys, building a tapestry of talents and of diversity of skill sets. I'm always a fan of that. Brian Williams represents one of those things that they haven't had in a while in that particular side of things. But of course, all that is yet to be determined. He's going to take. Do you think it's significant he's coming this weekend as opposed to, scheduling because it was a late ad later in the year, maybe in June or something like that?
Not really. No, I think it's just it worked out with him and his schedule. He's, like I said, he's had some visits set for a while now. So I don't think it changes all that much. I think he's just coming out of track season, clocked an 11.29 in the 100, which doesn't sound great, but when you're 6'4", it's tough to run 100 meters. That's why I avoid it. But also 6'5.5" high jumps, 40, almost a 45-inch triple jump. So he's got some pop there for a tall guy. My downside here, caught 23 passes for 359 yards and 5 touchdowns. So not a ton of production. I think this is a guy that's still got a lot of development ahead of him in the long run, which I think is exciting, but also would take some patience.
Last thing here, and we're just going to kind of touch on it here to end Fitz's recruiting update, is Ryan Snyder, our recruiting reporter, put out an excellent inside lash on Monday detailing the offensive line position in the class of 2026. Names you should know, and it, as far as I could tell, was categorized from top to bottom, giving you a full picture of how these things he's prioritizing in the sense of what he got from Penn State football. So you should definitely go check that out. And of course, the way you do that, subscribe to Blue White Illustrated here on the YouTube channel, but also BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Just $1 for the first week to try us out. You can go get that information. You can see like, oh, no, I have the sickness now. I want to know all the things about recruiting, which then it's going to turn into something that you do every single day. And you want to know that information, and you're going to start talking to people with like-minded interests on the Blue White Illustrated message board. And before you know it, you're going to be a lifer on Blue White Illustrated. You're going to be part of the family. And that's what we want for you and for us, to grow the family and to have people here on the BWI channel of things. So make sure you check all of that out. Okay, let's get into our final discussion for today. We are going to be asking, is this position better or worse? Penn State football was a drive, a throw, a moment away from the college football playoff national championship game last year, and they return all those players. We talked about this in the intro of the show, discussing all the players that are back. But did they get better in these certain areas? And we're not going to go through the whole program today. We're actually just going to start with the flashy, sexy positions. We're doing the skill positions here to start the show. We'll get to the offensive line and the tight ends a little bit later. And of course, then we'll get to the defense after that. Nate Bauer back on the show. So Nate, I want to start with you, and we're going to start with a super easy position. One that has absolutely no stakes attached to it, no emotions, no frustrations. We're going to start with the wide receiver room.
Great.
Are the wide receivers better or worse than last year?
Incomplete.
I don't know why I ever come to you to start a game. Yeah. You are the best at playing these games, Nate. You know the rules. You follow the rules. It's excellent. You certainly don't just take like a hatchet to the knee of the thing we're doing.
I'm just not there. I think that there are some good things about them, that they represent toughness, right? That's been a missing ingredient that Penn State hasn't had. I mean, I'm having this conversation in the chat, but the biggest failing, the thing that I think everybody points to about Trey and Omari last year was in big games, right? Like those were kind of the moments where the shortcomings were most notable. Amplified. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can say with any level of certainty that the players that they brought in are obvious upgrades in the same capacity, because they haven't been in that capacity. They haven't had those. They haven't had to do those things in those moments, right? Hudson and these guys brought it up, and it's fine. They're fine points to make. Hudson had a great catch against LSU, right? Well, won the game for USC against LSU. Ross was really good against Iowa. Okay. Pena was really good against Miami. That's to me, and I could be wrong. That's not Ohio State. That's not Oregon.
Miami had a historically bad defense last year. Yeah.
I'm just saying, right? And so I do think that some of it distracts from the actual conversation, which is that Nick, Drew, Kodal, Nicky, right, have to be dudes. Like those, They have to be at their best. They have to make it impossible to fail, right? Like the notion of Drew. We've had this conversation about Drew being bailed out, and he didn't get help last year in certain respects. I don't know that he's going to get it this year, and so that calls on him to be that much better. Yeah, at least I think.
I'll give the other side of that in just a minute, but I do want to get to Fitz. Fitz, better or worse in your opinion? The wide receivers this year.
I don't have an opinion. Right? Is that how we do that, Nate?
Yeah, that's exactly how you do it.
Awesome. I agree with a lot of what Nate said, because you look there's no transitive property to making a great catch against LSU, having a big day against Iowa, like to beating Ohio State, beating Oregon. Like that, that is what it keeps coming back to. And Nate, you said what we looked to for those guys was their time in big games. It wasn't even that. It was just big moments. Like that, the 4 or 5 plays that determine the outcome of a close football game. And they not only disappeared, but also handed the ball over to the other team. Like that is what you're missing. So the urge is obviously to say better, because you think it can't get much worse. But I mean, we thought that last year too, right? We thought that a year ago.
I just think it's unfair. Like we're talking about, it can't get much worse of a semifinal playoff team. Like they weren't bad as a group of receivers last year. I don't believe that they were a bad group of receivers. I think that they needed to be better than they were to achieve the highest level of success that there is in the game. Absolutely. Like fair argument to make. But they were good enough to beat 13 teams last year, right? Like I don't think that can be glossed over as nothing. And to me, what you're losing is the opportunity to see. I'm going to be and just like your boy, the kid that went to Auburn, I've lost his name. Keandre.
Just you like forgot Keandre. You of all people forgot Keandre. You're gonna hear about
just
this,
like
brother.
I was interested to see what Keandre did last year. I'm going to be highly interested to see what Trey specifically does in the SEC next year.
So box score will tell one story. And then does the actual, what we just talked about, what you laid out in terms of the big moments and the clutch catches, does that all change? Does that narrative change? Or is there an underlying current on his next team? And I'm not trying to put that on him. We're all, I think, genuinely hoping for the best for Trey Wallace, because he gave it his all here at Penn State. And I think he worked on becoming a better receiver and being a good teammate and all those things here at Penn State. The part that I think is better, and I will say that this is a better plan than it was last year. Penn State and their developmental mentality was Amari Evans was a high school quarterback that wasn't even much of a quarterback, was much more just an athlete running and being the best football player on the field for his high school football team. He is going to be our number 2 receiver, and we're going to use him as a junior. He is going to get better, and he's going to be the player that is infinite upside in rhetorical terms. Trey Wallace, highly athletic, jumps out of the gym, good speed, big frame. He's going to get better. Penn State instead this year has found 3 receivers that have production. At whatever level it was, they have guaranteed, air quotes, traits as somebody who has been on the field, caught footballs in big moments. So is the ceiling as high as last year? No. Is the floor higher? Yes. And to your point, Nate, Drew Aller. So the shortcut to an elite passing game without a stud number one wide receiver is have an elite quarterback that can basically have telepathy and understand where everyone is and anticipate where everyone's going to be and find the open receiver. Because maybe you don't have an unguardable guy, but you have three guys at the receiver position that can get open, and then you have superstar running backs, and you've got highly talented tight ends. Of those five eligibles, there should be somebody open on every single play. It's up to Aller to get them the football and know when to be aggressive, when to throw the ball into double coverage, when to find the check down and have that balanced attack. So it does have to be about Aller. It has to be about that. But this receiving core should give him the ability to find someone open on most plays. And to that, I think that's the biggest difference is if he feels confident that he can go to the backside and find his number two option on a play, then he should be more confident in those situations to just play football. And that, again, it's kind of making the receivers about the quarterback, but I think that's the plan this year. At least that's how I interpret what they're doing. And I think that's a smart plan given who you have at quarterback and given what you've tried to do before and how it didn't work, how that development did not push through to the other side of like true transformative ability. So let's move on to quarterback, better or worse in 2025. Fitz, I'm going to come to you.
It really depends on the receivers.
Are we having a conversation that's just going to be a snake eating its own tail?
That one's too well set up. Yeah, I'm going to go with better. I'm going to go with the better caveat as to Drew has what is ahead of him, which is a potential number one draft pick. This is a contract year for him. I think he knows that. I think he knows there's a bunch of improvements that he has to make. And I think he's doing that by not only doing the throwing stuff in the offseason with his guys, but also with his, he's got to develop a rapport, and he's done a pretty good job with Kyron Hudson. Pena's going to be in that mix very soon if he's not on campus already. Haven't even checked on that. But if you looked at the opportunities that he has to diversify what he sees in the defense, it's going to come differently without Tyler Warren. And I think that that's the biggest thing. I mean, you look at what he can do running the football with those running backs back there and how much the pressure that's going to take off of him, and then turning it into, well, now that the pressure is off of him, how does that react without an extra or with an extra safety in the box where a guy like Pena or Hudson can run a smash fade or something like that. You've got opportunities for him to make plays all over the field. And I think that that's really different than what we saw last year when he zoned in on Warren, when he, Nate said it in the comments, 5 targets for you 0 receptions, absolutely, against Notre Dame, not acceptable. But on 5 targets, that's not exactly a giant body of work. Now they need to be better and get open, obviously. But I think that this group has that ability. We saw a little bit in the spring game. Kyron Hudson found space. He was able to sit down in spots in the zone. And how often did we see that last year? We had guys running the spots last year is what we saw. So, I think that that's really what I'm looking at with him. I think we look at the entire room and say, Bo provided something, I know he's, kind of a hot button issue for a lot of Penn State fans, but like he provided you something different. He provided a spark at times, and he, ended up winning the Wisconsin game. So you look at the backups, Grunk's talented, Smolik talented. How does that work out into guys that are ready to go in and win a football game? We don't know because we haven't seen them out there. So curious how this entire room shakes out, but I think it is better. And by the way, going back to receiver real quick, I think 1 through 6, undoubtedly better than it was last year, more talented than it was last year. It's just a matter of like, you can't sit here and tell them or tell everyone that it's going to happen. Like we didn't do that last year. And now this year we're hearing that we told people that last year. Like it's not like people want it to happen so bad that it's kind of how that all shakes out. So quarterback, yes, better. I think 1 through 6 a receiver, also better. It's just a matter of them getting on the same page. And a lot of that comes down to Drew. I mean, this is the kid gloves came off last year, and now the whatever other gloves are off now as well.
I think this is interesting from JC Corrigan in the chat. He says Perbula versus no reps, speaking about the backup quarterback situation. Color me skeptical that Penn State is better. Nate, I'm going to let you discuss this particular part of the conversation because I feel like I may be a little too extreme here to have a rational conversation about the backup quarterback position and its value in the grand scheme of what we're talking about, which is the national championship conversation. So Nate, what do you think here about is Penn State's backup quarterback situation maybe not better, but is it dramatically worse than it was last year?
I don't think it matters.
Oh, well, great. Then I don't have to speak. Perfect.
Because, and this has always been the case. Look, yes, Penn State needed Bo Prabula to win a game at Wisconsin, right? You need, if Drew gets hurt, yes. But as you saw, I think in that Oregon game, maybe like they all kind of blend together for me at this point, but I think you saw that Bo's effectiveness, right? And so he didn't make it to the playoff, but he did play in that Oregon
in the
game.
Championship game, yeah.
Right. Bo's effectiveness against really good defenses became problematic for Penn State.
So
yeah.
Can I jump in here? I got the snap count in front of me. You played 20 snaps against West Virginia to open the season, but you go down to the games that were close-ish. 3 snaps against Illinois, 8 against UCLA, which was a closer game than, well, it wasn't a closer game than the score implores, but it was just a weird one.
Was it only 3 snaps against Illinois?
What's that? Was
it really only 3 against Illinois?
I mean,
wow.
PFF has been wrong before. They will be wrong again, but this is what they have down for Illinois. 5 at USC, 5 against Ohio State, 9 against Washington. Of course, the big win over Wisconsin got 36 snaps, but close game at Minnesota, 6 snaps. Big Ten championship game, 5 snaps. So it wasn't this big. I don't want to say conspiracy. It wasn't this big, huge part of the offense that we convinced ourselves that it was. It was successful at times, and other times it straight up derailed them. And I think that is one thing that you look at this year and say, they're not bringing in Grunkmeyer or Smolik to run a package that is significantly different than what the regular offense is. And I think that will help. It gives you a down back, and you can see what you can do with that with the weapons that you have.
It's also a position, in my film study last year, right around the USC game, is when they started giving some of those Wildcat snaps to Tyler Warren. Like, that's also part of the Bo package, was just generally that idea of a Wildcat quarterback under center. Penn State has other options this year. I don't know. I don't think we fully know what the plan is there, but I agree. I think there were times where it was a frustration in the offense to flow. And Bo, through no fault of his own, when he got the opportunity to make a play, he had 5 snaps a game. He wanted to make the best play possible, and usually that was to run the football because some of his options were to kind of dump the ball off on a triple option. So I think it created a certain amount of pressure. But to Nate's point, and to the larger point here, could Jackson Smolik or Ethan Grunkmeyer get you through the Wisconsin game? I believe they're talented enough to make that happen. I think those guys could win that game. And they'll also operate the offense closer to what Drew operates it at. Bo came in and threw almost exclusively option passes. I think that's an important context of how that game went. Now, the effectiveness of that showed like there's almost an entirely different offense that it could be with a guy like Bo Prabula under center. I guess the biggest perception difference here, guys, is that there is a portion of the Penn State fan base that thinks Penn State is better with Bo Prabula under center. That they would have won a national championship last year if Bo Prabula had been the quarterback. That is a prevailing sentiment for some fans. Nobody has that opinion about Jackson Smolik or Ethan Grunkmeyer this year. There are no fans that think, you know what, that guy that I saw play 1 snap in the SMU game, or the other guy that was a 3-star that I barely have ever heard of before, is going to walk in and be the savior. And I'm not trying to pick on those guys whatsoever. I think they're much better than most people think, but there isn't this widespread perception. Let's get to our last piece of the puzzle here. Maybe the centerpiece. At least it's the centerpiece of Nate's heart. Nate, better or worse running back?
Better.
Expound, please.
same guys, a year older. I mean, look, like I'll start with Katron because I think his change in the playoff was dramatic. And so if you can get that version of him, and I'm not sure that it's a guarantee that you do, but I think, I mean, that's certainly been the conversation this offseason, is that guy has continued into the offseason, highly motivated through winter workout, highly motivated in spring practice, and getting those opportunity for him to get faster, which was a big deal for him last year that he missed that. I've repeated this point. So if it seems new, it's not. I've said it 20 times since last year. Him missing that time to get better was significant for him and how he came back at the beginning of the season last year. So yes, just by default, I think Katron is going to be better. And then Nick, for both of these guys, I think there is a validity to a new voice in that room being beneficial to both of them. Right? Not that Jaywan wasn't great or didn't deliver great results over the years. I think he did. I think he was great at developing those guys. But I do think that there are times in guys' careers where having the opportunity to get a new set of eyes that can bring you along and maybe unlock some things, maybe present things differently to you than you have in the past, becomes highly beneficial. And I think, again, like really through no one's fault, but just circumstances, it will be serendipitous that this is the moment where that change happened, right? Because even if Stan Drayton brings nothing to the table, they're already really, really good running backs.
Yeah.
Right. Just that natural progression. But I don't think that. I think Stan Drayton does bring something to the table. And I think that you will see that play itself out in these guys' performances this year.
Yeah, it's been observably different in practice as well, from a tone and a technique standpoint of what he focuses on, what they've been working on, at least in front of us. Fitz, better or worse?
First off, I love that Nate went with Katron first to try to like maintain this idea of objectivity with talking Nick Singleton. Completely fraudulent, by the way. But you look at what Penn State brings back, and I liken it to college, really. These guys were taking gen eds for a long time. Now they are in their major classes. Stan Drayton has tailored their training, tailored their practices to improving what these guys need to improve the most. With Nick Singleton, that is open field running. With Katron Allen, it's a little bit of everything. I mean, he's catching the ball better. He's doing some really nice things there. These guys are really talented, and I'm excited to see what they can do behind an offensive line that should be good again. And if Penn State can take a little bit of pressure off with the passing game, more power to them, because I think they can definitely improve. So you look at it and you think that, okay, these guys have been in the system for a couple of years now. They've been in the program for a couple of years now. You know what you're getting with these guys. I'm not necessarily sure that's the case with what we see in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in the coming year. And it sounds stupid, but also like we kind of felt we knew what Katron was, and then the playoff came along and he's a different player, right? So I think that there's still levels of growth for both of those. Yeah. Plus you look at the depth behind them, the competition behind them. And you got to cultivate a third guy, a fourth guy, a fifth guy. We're not sure. I mean, there's going to be 7 scholarship running backs on the roster right now. Yeah. When Jabri Wallace-Coleman shows up in the summer. So that's a lot of competition right there. Will they eat each other alive? Maybe. But that's part of ascending to the top, cream rising to the top. So I'm excited to see that room. I think it's unquestionably better. And like I said, or like Nate said, not really a shot at Jaywan. It's just like natural progression on top of, hey, these guys coming back. Now all of a sudden you specialize as to what they need to work on the most. And it makes a lot of sense why they are ranked in the top 10 among returning running backs in the country by basically everybody.
So before I get to my final thoughts and before we get to their final thoughts here on the show, James Hughes says, hit that like button. Just some to back this up. Currently, almost 200 people watching the show, 41 likes. There have been almost 500 people throughout the show today coming in, checking out a couple minutes of the show throughout their day, their work morning. So please hit the like button. You just don't understand how important that is to us and to this show. And if you're here after 59 minutes of conversation and Nate not playing the game right and then finally getting into the rhythm at the end here, that you've been through the whole journey with us, obviously you like it. So hit the like button, because even if you know you like it and we know you like it, YouTube has no clue. And so that just, you need to let them know that this doesn't suck. The part about this I agree with everything you guys have said about the top 2 running backs. I don't want to, that's all well-trodden conversation points here. The thing that I was interested in and I was hoping for to really supercharge that depth conversation was Corey Smith and Quentin Martin getting bigger this offseason. Because both of those guys, Quentin Martin's 205 pounds, and that's a good size. That's not Big Ten size. And so at 6'1", there's more room for him to develop. The way they ran in the blue-white game, both those guys delivered a hit in the hole, so the mentality is there. I have no question about their ability to translate, what they've learned onto the football field. The question is, are they going to be productive when they get into that hit? Because both those guys got hit and went down. To break that tackle, being 180 pounds or being 100 or 200 pounds, you need that added size and strength, and both those guys had that room to grow. We'll see if they can get some of that done and some of that accomplished over the season, but I know that it's something that there's still a lot of progress for them to make there. And Tyke Hayes on the other side actually got a little bit smaller, trimmed some of the baby fat and became a Big Ten running back. So he's got some of that natural size and thickness that I think is going to create that competition that Fitz was talking about. Those are, some of the minute details of the general conversation about the competition that I think will create, a really good room that will eventually elevate the best to the top, and you'll have all those guys that we've already discussed. Okay, so that's what we got here for the show. There's always more coming up. Fitz, what do you got coming up this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com?
Better. Oh, sorry.
Better.
No, we got a bunch of stuff with recruiting. As I mentioned, the Elite 11 is coming in this weekend, which means a bunch of quarterbacks, but also they've moved that to the All-22 camp as well. So you're going to get some good players in to work out. First big weekend of official visitors. Went through that in the S Zone on Friday. So check that out if you get an opportunity. We have a list on our site. I think that's kind of outdated by now, actually, because there's some movement. Guys not coming, some guys coming in. So Penn State's going to have the opportunity to put that red carpet out. On the recruiting side, again, Ryan wrote a really good inside lash yesterday. I think Penn State's got a lot of momentum right now on the recruiting trail. Definitely more from a commitment standpoint before official visits than we thought, which we'll take. Yeah, absolutely. We'll take that kind of content generation. But check us out at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I don't think that you will regret it.
And we're going to be talking about the more of that on the Thursday show and how those commitments maybe putting a little bit of pressure on guys to make a decision for the Nittany Lions if they really want a spot. I don't know. Maybe that's a show topic for later in the week. Nate, what do you got coming up this week?
Tight ends, worse.
Well, that's next week, Nate. That's next week.
You said skill positions. They have skills.
I'm lumped because I want to make sure. I'm trying to. Don't make me give away the game. We're milking this.
We didn't call long snapper either. That's the most skilled position there is.
They block. So they're part of the. I'm just shifting their responsibilities to the running back room or the offensive line because they kind of fit together. That's all. But good to know that for when we do that next week, Nate. You've given a preview. I will make you defend that position later. That's it for today. The show coming up tomorrow. Of course, we got the wrestling show back this week. All kinds of great stuff for you here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We'll talk to you then.